Assalamualaikum everyone, my name is Nitasha and welcome to another episode of Shaam Ki Chai, where I interview Pakistanis doing really cool things. And today I have a very cool Pakistani with us, Saeed. She is a media personality, she is a journalist, and she is now a senior producer and host at AJ Plus. So thank you so much for being on the show, Sana.
Hey, welcome, Salam. It is great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So I was actually born in Lahore, and my family is split between Lahore and Karachi.
Okay, same with my family. Very cool.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. But we're Kashmiri from Srinagar, and from both sides of my family. They came during different periods, but everyone came like right before 1948. So instead of like the late 1800s, like a lot of Kashmiris migrated to Lahore, to Punjab. And so my family was like, it was kind of like between Srinagar and then like Punjab, and then they moved to what then became the Pakistani side of Punjab.
Oh, do your grandparents have like crazy partition stories?
They do. They all had very, very crazy, very traumatic partition stories, which, you know, I think like we have so many generations of people who have not at all talked about and dealt with that trauma. And so when my grandparents would tell me what they experienced, I'd be like, what? Like, you saw what? You witnessed what? And then, you know, learning those stories was very helpful in like understanding so much even of the things that happened in my own family as well.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's so important for us to recognize that wasn't 500-600 years ago, right? It was 70 plus years ago. It's not that long ago. It's 2 generations, 3 generations. And so what that means is like, I think sometimes so many of us end up having a very negative outlook on our own communities and how we act without recognizing like a lot of those, you know, behaviors are not like inherent to us as a people, but actually because of like all this like awful history that all of our family members, our grandparents, et cetera, have experienced, not just in terms of, because obviously not everyone migrated to either side of the border, but what that does collectively, right? And for those of us who are Pakistani, like our country is not that old, right? We come from traditions that are very old, but like our country, the idea of being Pakistani it's very modern.
But you did not start out in media. You have a background in Islamic studies, is that correct? And so how do you go from Islamic studies to a career in media? Let's talk about that.
So I think like a lot of desis, although this never came really from my family, but when I was like younger, like middle school, high school, I wanted to be a doctor. And this wasn't even because like, oh, it's a desi thing to do. Like my parents never really kind of pressured us in any way for that. Like they have 2 kids, one of whom is an English teacher and the other one's a journalist. You know what I mean? I'm like, we went in very non-traditional routes.
Yes.
But like, I want to do that. And then the more I kind of studied history and politics, and especially like, honestly, like after the Iraq war started, I was like, I want to be useful in a different way, right? I want to be useful, but I want to be useful in a different way. Then I wanted to become a lawyer because I wanted to do like international human rights. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to be a lawyer.
I could totally see you as a lawyer, like an international human rights lawyer. I could totally see that.
I still think about it. I'm like, maybe we should go to law school. I don't want to get in debt. Yeah.
You never know.
No, I could, but I just don't want the debt. There's so much debt with law school. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Unless I get a full ride. So then maybe. But who knows? But and then I was like, oh, I want to do international law and whatnot. So I started doing, so for my undergrad, I did political science and Middle East studies.
Okay. Yep.
Originally I was political science and philosophy, and then I got more interested in Middle East politics and whatnot. And I was like, all right, if I want to do international human rights, I should focus on like, you know, Middle East studies.
Yes.
And then I fell in love with the department so much. The Middle East studies degree was like under the Islamic Studies department of McGill, which is where I went. And McGill has like, our Islamic Studies department is considered like really top notch, fantastic, very, very distinguished. And I really, really fell in love with it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to apply only to one law school and to one grad school, right? I decided to do this.
Okay.
And I applied to McGill Law and I applied to McGill Grad School, Islamic Studies. And I was like, whatever I get, that is what I will go with.
Okay.
And it's so funny because I did not get into McGill Law because my French was not strong enough.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, because they require for you to be bilingual. And the funny thing is, I used to have extremely strong French, but because I hadn't practiced, even though I lived in Montreal, like I never really needed to use it.
Sure,
my French was not strong enough. And so they sent me a letter saying like, sorry, but your French isn't strong enough. And then I know. It was just like, I was like, so then I got into grad school.
How does your family react? Because I know in a lot of desi families, going into media is like taboo. You don't do that, right? So what do your parents say? What does your community say when you're like, hey, I want to be a journalist. I want to go into media?
My parents initially were like, what? Because, first, like, I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor. And then I actually had my history teacher talk to them and say like, hey, I think Sana, should probably consider, instead of studying like pre-med, she should maybe consider like, she really wants to do poli-sci stuff. So I had like a teacher talk to them and they were like, what? But they were cool with it. They were like, yeah, like if that's what you want to do, then like, sure. Okay. And then when I told, but because they thought I was going to go to law school, they're like, okay, cool. You're not going, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to go to law school. And then I didn't get into law school. Yeah. And they were like, you want to go to grad school? And I was like, yeah, I want to do Islamic studies. And my mom was like, wait, so I'm going to have to tell my friends that my daughter's a mullah? I was like, no. No. Yeah. And for my parents, like my dad, the only thing that kind of made them a little ambivalent about me going to grad school was that year, both my parents lost their jobs because they worked for American companies, and both those American companies shut down. And so in their offices in Vancouver. And so my parents were like, yo, like, we're not going to be able to afford this in any way. And so I was already in major student debt, and I was like, no, I'll work, I'll figure it out. And that's what I did. But my parents, alhamdulillah, were very supportive, and they've been supportive of my career the entire time. I think they have faced like community, not like backlash, but definitely questioning of like them allowing, first they let me go. I didn't realize it was a weird thing in our community, but they let me go across the country, right? From Vancouver to Montreal for school. And so many people in the community were like, oh my God, you let your 18-year-old daughter live so far away from home. Yeah. Like, are you worried? Aren't you this, et cetera? Because technically I've been living away from home since I was 18 years old. Yeah. And so, they face those kind of questioning, people saying like, oh, aren't you worried your daughter's going to be too independent? Aren't you worried?
God forbid for independent women. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then also, like the whole, like, well, what about marriage? And like, aren't you worried about like all those type of things? So, but they are pretty, they're pretty proud, like for sure, of what I've done. Unfortunately, there are people, and I don't want to say like the entire community, obviously, but there are always people in the community who will find something to comment on, right? So if they're not commenting on like my career, then they're like, I used to wear hijab. So they would comment on the fact that I wore hijab. You'd be like, oh my God, like you wear hijab and no one else in the community is wearing, like in our very particular community, like no one else is. You should talk to the other girls and get them to wear hijab. And I was like, oh, no, I'm good. Like, that's not my job. Like, I'm not going to, and then if it wasn't that, then they would talk about things like, oh my God, her weight, or like, you know what I mean? It was like weird things like that. And you're just like, so if people aren't talking about one thing, they're going to talk about another thing. And I think at some point my parents were like, this is like, why relay this to our daughter? So after I graduated in I graduated in 2012, but I finished my master's thesis in 2011, in August 2011, and then I moved home. Okay. And I thought I was going to be home for like, 2-3 months and I would find a job, forgetting the fact that I'd graduated into like a terrible economy. I spent 3 years at home. I lived at home in the middle of, by the way, at this point, my parents had moved to northern Alberta. So like we were in the boondocks, middle of nowhere, in a town of 2,000 people to a 2,500 people. Yeah, like really in the middle of nowhere.
And you're going from the hill, like Montreal, to like the boonies of Alberta. That's crazy.
Yeah. It was just like, oh my God. And I freelance. Like I would basically in the mornings, like during the day, I'd be working as a cashier, and at night I would freelance, like writing for random publications. I did a lot of free work which I got really exploited, which I think is a lot harder. I mean, freelancers still get exploited today, but I feel like today it's a lot harder than it was to exploit a freelancer than it was even like 10 years ago when I was doing it.
Okay. Why is that?
I think it's just because of the fact how we use social media.
Okay.
Right. And so no company wants to be called out for not paying their employees because it happens, right? Like I've seen it happen where if someone does not pay their employee, their freelancer, that freelancer absolutely calls them out, which as they should.
They should.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think certain things are a little harder to do. I think more and more journalists are doing freelance for various reasons. And so like a lot more people are better versed in how to freelance. Like I didn't know how to freelance. Like I did not know how to do it to make it a sustainable career. And I also, like, a lot of people don't know this, but I got my job at AJ Plus because I was hired as part of the launch team, the team that launched AJ Plus. I was hired well before launch because they liked my writings online and they liked my Twitter. They were like, "You're really, yeah." Okay. And they reached out to me and they're like, "We think you got some sharp ideas. You want to come to San Francisco and check out what we're doing?"
Nice. Okay. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I think like I was really blessed that I had no video experience, only print, and I got hired to do video. And I think that is something you will not find even today. It's very, very hard to break into digital media, for instance, unless you have digital experience or something.
So what has your biggest professional struggle been thus far?
So it's funny because I was having this conversation the other day, and I'm really curious for your thoughts, because I know you've done a lot of work in STEM and especially for women in STEM. And I found that, so obviously, like as women, we know what like sexism and misogyny looks like, right? We've experienced it and whatnot.